Lesson 120, Proportions. Continuing our study of ratios today, we are going to look at proportions. And a proportion is just an equation showing that two ratios are equal. So if you think back to a couple lessons ago, our first lesson on ratios, we looked at equal or equivalent ratios. That's what we're going to be working with today. And in order to understand how proportions work, we're going to look at one of the applications for proportion. And you use proportion a lot when you are doing drawing. That's why I have a picture or two pictures of some drawn heads here. All right, so a proportion is really just showing measurements. So we have here, let's imagine that this is a real person's head. And let's say that the distance or the distance between the chin and the top of the head is 20 centimeters. Now, if somebody's head were 20 centimeters tall, the eyes should be around the center or middle point of that line. They should be about halfway in between the top of the head and the chin. So if the head is 20 centimeters tall, the eyes should be at about the 10 centimeter mark. Now, what I've really shown you is a proportion. So if the eyes are about halfway between the top of the head and the chin, we can represent that using ratios. So it should be about halfway down. And if we have a head that is 20 centimeters tall, the eyes should be at about the 10 centimeter mark. This is an example of a proportion, an equal ratio. 1/2 is equal to 10/20. All right, so you can think about it like just like an equivalent fraction, right? You multiply by 10, you multiply by 10, and you end up with an equal ratio. So the face is proportionate. Now, when you're drawing, you're usually not drawing, if you're drawing a head, you're not drawing it true to life size. Quite often you'd be drawing it a little bit smaller. So let's say you wanted to draw a head that was 10 centimeters tall on your piece of paper, and you need to figure out where those eyes need to go. So if our head is 10 centimeters tall, you can use proportion and think to yourself, well, the eyes have to be about halfway down the face, and my head in total is 10 centimeters tall. So just work with it like an equivalent fraction. What was happening to that 2? We had to multiply it by 5 to get 10. We multiply the 1 by 5 to get 5. So your eyes should be at the 5 centimeter mark. If you were to make your eyes lower down, like down here or something, you would end up with a drawing that was unproportional, right? Your person would have a giant forehead and it would look really weird because you haven't used your proportions correctly. They are not equivalent. So a couple things that you are going to be asked to do in your textbooks today is to use cross products to check for equality. This is not something new, but I'm going to go over it so that you understand how you need to answer these questions. So you're going to be given two ratios, and you're going to have to decide if they are proportionate, if they are equal. So the way to do that is to think back, right? Cross products, we do 9 times 2. That gets us an 18. We do 3 times 6. That also gets us an 18, which means our ratios are equal. This is a proportion. So in your textbook, your answer should look like this. You should be giving me both cross products and then either an equal sign or a not equal sign. Because for this one, we do 9 times 2, we get an 18 again. Then we do a 4 times 3, which gets us a 12. 18 and 12 are not equal. So we do a not equal sign. So this isn't a correct, it isn't a proportion. It's not equal. This is what your answer needs to look like in your textbook. All right, so using those cross products to determine if those ratios are equal. The next thing that you're going to be asked to do is to solve for the unknown. And some of your questions are going to be pretty easy ones like this one, where you can just kind of look at it and think to yourself in equivalent fraction terms, right? You can think the denominator of 8, what happened to it? It was multiplied by 8 to get a 64, which means you also have to multiply the numerator by 8. So your answer should be x equals 8, because 1 times 8 is 8. Okay, so for some of them, you'll just be able to think about equivalent fractions and multiplying to get your missing x. However, you will also come across questions like this. There's no whole number that we can multiply 6 by to get a 9, so we can't use that same strategy. It's going to undo that. So what you have to do here is use your knowledge of cross products. We can multiply 6 times 6 to get us a 36. Now, since there's an equal sign here, we know that this is a proportion, it's equivalent ratios, which means x times 9 should also get us a 36. So we've got something times 9 equaling 36. So you can think to yourself, x has to be something that I can multiply 9 by to get a 36. And you should be able to just do that one in your head and come up with the answer of x equals 4. 4 times 9 is 36. All right, so using your knowledge of cross products to find the answer. And that one was pretty simple to do in your head. However, you may come also across questions that look like this, with larger, more complicated numbers that are not so easy to do in your head. And I'm going to show you how to work with those. So start off with the two numbers that you can multiply with the cross products. So if you do 70 times 5, you end up with a 350. And now for the other one, we know that 25 times something should equal 350. 25 times something equals 350. But it's not so easy to just go in this blank. It's not one of your math facts that you have memorized that should be nice and quick. Not so easy to just think about what that is. So if you come across a question like this, you have to do some dividing. Okay, in order to find out what's missing, what the missing x is, you take your answer of 350 and you simply divide it by the number that you do know. Okay, so you do 25 into 350. So goes once, we end up with 25, subtract, we've got a 10, bring it down, 4 times 25 is 100, end up with a remainder of 0. All right, so our final answer is the x equals 14. And if you check that, if you do 14 times 25, you should end up with 350. So just using what you know about cross products to find the missing numbers in these proportions. So some of them you may be able to just treat it like an equivalent fraction. Some of them may be a little bit more complicated. So use the different strategies depending on what question is before you.